Hello, today I want to talk about Star Wars. You get the idea. So why am I talking about Star Wars today? Well, lots of people are doing it because the new movie Rise of Skywalker is coming out, and I'm feeling very nostalgic because I'm sure that they will keep making lots and lots of Star Wars movies, but the Star Wars saga that was promised to me when I was a child, the idea of having 9 episodes, is about to be fulfilled, assuming that I can survive 6 more days. When the movies come around, I get very excited because I love the stories and I love the characters, and most of all, I guess I love the world that George Lucas created. I was journaling about some of my earliest memories, and I realized that since I was 5.5 years old when I saw the film, that I don't have that many memories of actually watching the film for the very first time. I recorded what I could. So let me take you through my memories of my first Star Wars experience. So when I was 5.5 years old, I loved cartoons, so I loved going to see Disney movies. I have a memory of seeing a re-release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and being freaked out, very scared when the witch is trying to kill Snow White and smash the dwarves with a rock. So I loved the cinematic experience. This was in Washington State, and it was before we had places like the Alderwood Mall and multiplexes where you could watch lots of different movies at one location. They had movie theaters in Seattle, and they had a movie theater in downtown Everett, which is, I believe, where we saw Star Wars when it was first released. So at 5.5 years old, I don't think I had any idea what Star Wars was going to be about. I think my older brothers and their friends were excited to see it. I don't have any memories before seeing the movie of seeing any previews, of having any idea of what Star Wars would be about. I think I was just excited to be eating popcorn and just being at the movies in general. And then when Star Wars began and we see lots of lasers and we see a creepy, scary guy named Darth Vader, I was really drawn into the whole world. So my memory of seeing Star Wars the first time is pretty vague. I know that I was, I think, very happy, kind of overwhelmed by it. And the only takeaways I remember having, really, is that I fell immediately in love with R2-D2, and I believed that all of the robots were real. I was fascinated at the idea of meeting R2-D2 and perhaps C-3PO. Probably I wanted to meet C-3PO just so he could translate what R2-D2 was saying. If I remember correctly, I also, for a long time after Star Wars, I remember my friends and I debated about stormtroopers and whether or not stormtroopers were robots. I know that seems kind of dumb, because obviously it seems like, well, they're not robots. Stormtroopers are people that are wearing the uniforms. That's how Luke Skywalker and Han Solo disguised themselves, and that was part of the playground debate. We would talk about, did Luke have to empty out all the robot parts before putting on the robot outfit of the stormtrooper. Now here's the reason why many of us, and I was on the fence, I didn't know, but many of us believed that stormtroopers were robots because on the action figure, on the back of the action figure of a stormtrooper, or I guess the regular movie costume, there was an O, an I, and what could be another I or a lowercase l. So people on the playground believed that said oil, and why would it say oil unless it was a robot in need of oil? What else do I remember? I remember having a vague impression that I had a crush on Princess Leia, and I thought that Luke and Leia made a cute couple. I remember that the trash compactor was very scary, and I think I must have closed my eyes. The weird creature with the red eyeball that sticks its head out, I did not see that in the first 2 viewings of Star Wars. So when I was 5.5, and then later when it was re-released, I think I had my eyes closed because I don't think I saw that monster until the 3rd time around. So much so that when I finally saw the monster, I was like, was that monster always in the movie, or did they add that? one of the reasons why Star Wars ignited my imagination was because of the lightsaber. The lightsaber is just a really just being a child and having markers, you just spend a lot of time going. That's probably how I spent all of second grade, and I apologize to Mrs. Haskell because I must have just been just doing that throughout class. So lightsabers were awesome, and there was a lot of playground debate about lightsabers related to Star Wars, because there's a moment where it looks like Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber when he's fighting Darth Vader, like it's losing power. It's because of the angle, because he's going, and maybe it's kind of pointed right at the camera, so to speak, and so it looks like it's just turning into like a little single point of light. And so my friends and I thought, like, I think the power is draining, that he needs a new battery on his lightsaber. And other kids on the playground would say, no, the Force. Darth Vader is using the Force to drain the lightsaber battery. So there you go. I think they fixed that. And speaking of lightsabers and that battle, I assumed when I saw Star Wars the first, second, probably third and fourth time, I assumed that if one got hit by a lightsaber, they just disappeared. So I thought lightsabers, that would be a very peaceful way to die. So unfortunately, the strongest memory I have about watching Star Wars for the very first time is not the movie at all, but it happened right after the movie. Star Wars obviously was incredibly popular. It was a long line to get in to see the movie, and it was a long time to get out of the parking lot. The parking lot, I remember, being very crowded. I remember my father driving the ugly green van that we had as a child. And I think it was my older brothers, Jeff and Orshawn, that pointed out there was a parking lot employee, and he had basically a little flashlight that looked kind of like a little lightsaber. And I thought, like, that is so cool. So that led to the next wonderful thing for me about Star Wars in my childhood, the toys. I enjoyed the Christmases that followed the release of Star Wars and birthdays that followed. I got so many Star Wars toys. That was my go-to request for Christmas for, the next 4 or 5 years. So I got the TIE Fighter, and the wings popped off of the TIE Fighter, and the X-Wing, and the wings would pop open, and there was like a selection of the Death Star that I had. Oh, the Millennium Falcon was the best toy ever. I'm so sad that gradually fell apart, and I gave a lot of my Star Wars figures away. I still have this guy, the Power Droid, and I still have Chewbacca. Chewbacca, if you can see, Chewbacca was in a 4th of July accident, and so he has a melted head. So toys were wonderful. I also enjoyed almost all of the TV appearances that happened. My favorite is when the Star Wars characters appear on the Muppets. And I also have a fond memory of the Donnie and Marie Osmond show. I think stormtroopers appear. I think they might be on roller skates, or maybe Darth Vader, and they're singing Darth Vader Raiders. Unless that's a fever dream. Now, the Star Wars Christmas special, I remember as a child being excited about that, and we gathered around the TV, and I think what happened was that I ended up playing with my Star Wars toys while the Christmas special was on. I remember it being boring. I remember it being like, it was kind of like a variety show. But I equated variety shows with something that grown-ups would watch. So I was kind of interested in the little Wookiee kid. And I was excited when Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia finally show up at the end. But it was, I knew that wasn't a good thing, the Star Wars Christmas special. But at the same time, as a kid, anytime there was something Star Wars going on, I was very excited. Finally, when Star Wars came out on VHS, I watched it many, many times then. But before we had things like the VCR, I had the Star Wars storybook and cassette. And so I would put that into my tape recorder and I would sit in my room and I would play with my Star Wars toys and I would just listen to the Star Wars cassette over and over. And so there's still movie moments when I watch Star Wars where I'm like, I hear the sound bite or I hear the musical sequence and I'm like, oh, that's the Star Wars cassette. Whenever I get to the scene in Star Wars when the Millennium Falcon is caught in the tractor beam and it's going into the Death Star and the music is getting very dramatic, then I know it's like, oh, we're at the end of the cassette. It's time to turn it over. So throughout my childhood, the first Star Wars movie, which I suppose I could be calling A New Hope, but to me when I was a kid, because it wasn't originally called that, it was just Star Wars. So I don't very often call it Episode 4. I don't very often call it A New Hope, unless I'm just talking to people where if I say Star Wars, I'm thinking of the very first Star Wars movie from 1977. Anyway, that movie was a joyful experience for me, in part because everyone in my circle, everyone at my school, everyone on the playground, everyone in my neighborhood, everyone, whether it was my age or they're older than me, they were teenagers, and even adults, everyone seemed to love this movie. And if they didn't love the movie, they just didn't say anything about it. It just wasn't interesting for them, and they didn't argue about it. So it seemed like years and years went by before I ever met someone that did not like Star Wars. I think when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, I met like a distant cousin from Alaska, and she said that she and her husband went to see Star Wars at the movie theater, and she said, we were about a half hour in, and we saw the droids walking through the desert, and I looked at my husband, he looked at me, and I said, are you interested in this? And he said, no. And so then we just left, and I was like, you left Star Wars? Like, that was very strange to me. But for the most part, when I was growing up, everybody liked Star Wars. So when the prequels came out, it became a very different and baffling experience for me because I was so used to the idea of like, yeah, everybody likes Star Wars, so everybody's going to like these prequels. And many people did not. But that's for another YouTube video. I'm excited to see the new Star Wars movie, as I'm always excited to see new Star Wars movies. And if by chance George Lucas happens to watch this video, or anybody else connected to the very first Star Wars movie, I want to thank you for creating something that had a very positive impact on my childhood, that ignited my imagination, and I don't even have a third cool thing to say. That's all I have to say, that you ignited my childhood imagination and it had a very positive ripple effect. So thank you, George Lucas, and all of the creators behind Star Wars.